I never thought that one day my mother-in-law, the very woman who had scorned and abandoned me for 15 years, would come seeking me out, pleading earnestly to live nearby. Even more ironic was the fact that the one she had once wholeheartedly favored now turned his back on her without hesitation. There are truths that only time is cruel enough to reveal. Have you ever had to choose between kindness and self-protection? I would love to hear about your journey. Don't forget to support genuine stories like this, and follow the channel so you don't miss the upcoming emotional journeys. Thank you for listening. Sometimes growing up means learning to choose peace for yourself. When I first entered my husband's family, I naively believed I would be welcomed as a new member. But Margaret, my mother-in-law, never once hid her coldness and disdain towards me. Her scrutinizing glances, her sharp remarks about every little thing I did, became a familiar part of my early married life. I remember vividly those family gatherings where just a frown or a passing, cutting comment from her would be enough to make me feel like a stranger, misplaced in that house. Thomas, my husband, fared no better. In fact, he was the first to bear the wounds inflicted by that woman. As a child, Thomas had witnessed his mother's betrayal of his father, an event that had left deep scars within him. Abandoned amidst bitter quarrels and cold indifference, Thomas grew up burdened by feelings of rejection and inadequacy. So, when we got married, Thomas was determined to create a different kind of family, one rooted in genuine respect and love. But that also meant we had to maintain a distance from the source of our past pain. In the beginning, we tried to preserve the relationship, festive calls, short visits. However, the more we tried, the more evident the contempt and disrespect we received in return. Any achievement of ours was either belittled or deliberately ignored, until one day, after a particularly humiliating public insult during a family gathering, Thomas took my hand and led me away from that house, and we never looked back for the next 15 years. We bore no resentment. In fact, cutting ties brought a new peace into our marriage. There were no more painful expectations, no more venomous words. We built our life with our own hands, step by step, without relying on anyone, without harboring false hopes. And I even learned to forgive, not because she deserved it, but because I refused to carry that burden any longer. Yet time has a strange, mocking way about it. When those who once scorned you grow weak, lonely, and find themselves in need, they seek to pull you back into their lives. Not because they have truly changed, but because they no longer have any other choice. And that is when your maturity and self-respect must guide your decisions. All those years, I kept wondering what I had done to deserve the cold looks and silent disdain for Margaret. I was not a perfect daughter-in-law, but I always tried to behave properly, care for Thomas wholeheartedly, and respect his family. Yet, in her eyes, I always seemed like an outsider, never good enough, never worthy of acceptance. Margaret never resorted to fiery arguments or public insults. Her way of hurting was far more subtle. A passing sarcastic remark, as if by accident, a disappointed shake of the head in front of others, deliberate attempts to exclude me from family conversations. Everything was done so skillfully that outsiders could hardly notice, yet it cut into me with invisible wounds that never truly healed. I witnessed Thomas endure it in silence many times, struggling to keep the peace rather than worsen the rift. I knew he was hurting just as much as I was, not only because of the way Margaret treated me, but also because it reopened old wounds inside him that had never fully healed. From those shared pains, we decided to protect our marriage by establishing clear boundaries. No more futile efforts to seek acceptance from someone unwilling to give it. Cutting ties with Margaret was not an easy decision. It came with guilt, regret, and at times self-doubt. But as the years passed and we experienced the peace that followed, I knew it was the best decision we ever made for each other. Those boundaries became a protective wall around our lives, not a wall of hatred, but a wall of self-respect and self-love. Because some relationships, even those bound by blood, are not worth preserving at any cost if all they bring is pain. What hurt even more was that throughout all that time, Margaret never once tried to mend the relationship. There was no phone call to apologize, no sincere inquiry about her well-being. That silence itself was an answer. Respect cannot be demanded, nor can it be begged for. It must be given freely, and if it is not, it is better to move forward without looking back. Now, as Margaret and Walter suddenly wished to reconnect, to bridge the gap, I feel neither anger nor sorrow anymore. Instead, there is only a quiet clarity. I understand that their outreach is not born from awake affection, but from need and fear as old age creeps in. And with the hard lessons of the past, I know this time I will not give so naively again. My kindness will have limits. The boundaries I built, they will remain firm for the sake of my own life. When we distanced ourselves from my husband's family, I thought everything would end there. A distance large enough, long enough, cold enough for everyone to move on with their lives without any more entanglements. Yet, stories of Margaret and Walter would still occasionally reach us through the indifferent recounting of distant relatives. And I heard them, even though I wished not to, the stories about Patricia. Patricia, the daughter-in-law Margaret, had openly favored. The woman she praised at every opportunity, as if to indirectly belittle me by exalting another. I had never been jealous of Patricia. Honestly, she had always felt like a stranger to me. But each time I heard of Margaret's lavish gifts, tens of thousands of dollars for a new house, a car, extravagant holidays, my heart sank. Not out of any desire for material things, but because once again it was made clear that I had never truly been considered part of that family. Thomas knew it too. He remained silent whenever such news crept into the peaceful dinners we shared. It was not because he didn't care, but because he had learned to let such things pass like the wind. "We have never needed them," he once said, squeezing my hand under the table, a silent vow that we would always rely on each other and no one else. And yet, ironically, it was Patricia, the one who received the most, who was the first to turn her back. When Margaret reached out in her old age seeking help, Patricia refused without hesitation. Coldly, firmly, without a shred of hesitation. The woman who had once been pampered now regarded family duty as a debt fully paid, nothing left to bind her anymore. Perhaps Margaret never imagined this day would come. She always believed loyalty could be bought with gifts, that indulgence could forge invisible chains binding someone forever. But reality proved far harsher. Gratitude cannot be born from material wealth. It grows only from genuine love, from respect and fair treatment, things she had never given to Thomas and me. When Patricia refused, I did not feel triumphant, nor was I saddened. I only felt that it was the inevitable result of what Margaret had sowed throughout her life. She had wagered her affections on the most fragile things, money, favoritism, false pride. And now, when she needed a hand truly willing to hold hers, all of it had vanished. Thomas stayed quiet for a long time after hearing the news. Then he turned to me, his eyes no longer bitter as they once were, only serene with acceptance. "We just need to keep living our own life," he said, once again reminding both of us that no matter how much the past screamed, it could not drag us back to the place that had once broken our hearts. We had learned our lesson. Love cannot be bought. Loyalty cannot be demanded from those who only know how to love themselves. And the true worth of a family lies not in what it gives through wealth, but in what it nurtures through love and mutual respect. Even though we had decided not to return to the past, we could not prevent the subtle changes that were quietly unfolding. After Patricia's outright rejection, it was as if Margaret and Walter suddenly woke up from a dream they had woven for themselves. The person they had poured all their affection and money into nurturing, in the end, only left them with indifference and distance. Not long after, the phone calls began. At first, they were sparse, like a way of testing the waters. Walter would call first, his voice trying to sound cheerful but strained, asking about work, about life. Margaret rarely picked up the phone directly, but I knew she was silently listening on the other end. At first, Thomas responded only with brief, polite answers. He did not want to be cruel, nor did he want to open his heart. I understood that. The way he answered, while simultaneously building invisible walls, showed that he still carried scars from the years of rejection, no matter how grown and steady he seemed on the surface. Then one day, Margaret herself called me. I remember that moment vividly. The phone on the table vibrated, flashing the word, "Margaret." I looked at it the way one looks at a stone suddenly thrown into a calm lake. It was not exactly anger. It was not fear either. It was simply stillness, a kind of peace that had lasted so long, now gently disturbed. I answered the call. On the other end, her voice was hoarse, carrying an unfamiliar hesitancy. She inquired about my health, asked about Thomas, and mentioned that she and Walter were thinking about moving. To be closer to family, she said, trying to sound soft. I did not react immediately. I just listened, and in the long silence between us, I realized what Margaret had never said. She did not truly miss us. She was afraid of aging, of loneliness, of having no one to care for her, afraid of the coldness of abandonment, the very thing she had sown for so many years without ever realizing it. Could we have dinner together sometime? Margaret suggested. A dinner, seemingly simple, yet heavy like a slow-motion replay of old memories. I did not reject her outright. I was no longer the young woman once longing for her recognition. I merely smiled softly and said, I'll discuss it with Thomas. We'll consider it. I had learned not to reject with anger, nor to accept with naivety. I left the door slightly ajar, not wide open, not slammed shut. A door that could only be fully opened if the person knocking had truly changed, not out of need, but out of genuine sincerity. After that call, Thomas and I sat down and talked for a long time, not to decide whether to forgive, but to remind ourselves that the past cannot be changed. We could not fix Margaret or Walter. The only thing we could control was how we allowed them to affect our present. Maturity does not always come from fierce confrontations. It often comes from calmness, from knowing that we have the right to choose, and that not every hand extended needs to be grasped. And so we chose to stand firm, not to turn our backs, but also not to run toward them. We maintained our ground, close enough to be courteous, yet distant enough to be safe. Our lives did not change much after that meeting. Thomas and I continued to pursue our own plans, the dreams we had long nurtured, dreams built with our own hands, requiring no one's charity or validation. From time to time, I still received a few calls from Margaret, some messages left behind, occasionally a text asking about our well-being. But there was always a silent distance between us, like an invisible fence that both sides understood could not be easily crossed. No longer were there expectations or pressure, only polite courtesies, just enough to avoid complete estrangement, but also enough to safeguard the peace of our family. Looking back on the journey, I realized one thing very clearly. The success Thomas and I achieved did not come from anyone's support. We built everything ourselves, from our careers to our finances, from our little home to the real values of family. There were no grand gifts, no special favors from elders, only perseverance, understanding, and silent companionship beside each other. This achievement became even more meaningful when I saw the contrast in Thomas's family. Those who once enjoyed favoritism, who received every kind of assistance, eventually lacked the most important things: maturity, responsibility, and gratitude. Patricia may have received tens of thousands of dollars. She may have been doted on endlessly, but when the storms came, she turned her back faster than anyone else. Whereas we, the ones once disregarded, once pushed to the margins, turned out to be the only ones standing firmly on our own feet. Not because we were more talented, but because we had no other choice but to rely on ourselves. And through that very process, we developed a strength that could never be stolen. I thought about Margaret and Walter many times, not with bitterness, but with an understanding tinged with regret. They had the opportunity to build truly lasting relationships with their children, but they chose the wrong path. They gambled love for material gain, showed partiality and neglect, and in the end, received exactly what they deserved. I do not know whether Margaret ever truly realized these things. Perhaps she still believes that just by getting close again, or rekindling the relationship, everything would return to how it once was. But I know some things, once broken, can never be made whole again. Forgiveness may happen, but trust, once lost, is not easily reclaimed. Thomas understands this too. Between us, no many words are needed. A single glance is enough to affirm that the love and loyalty we share are the strongest foundation we have, not the relationships that had long rotted away. We are not spiteful. We are willing to help within reasonable limits. But there will be no sacrificing of our lives, our dreams, or our peace to chase after something that never truly belonged to us in the first place. Through tireless effort, through wounds that have healed over time, Thomas and I have built a small world of our own, where love is based on respect and kindness always walks hand in hand with discernment. That is our greatest victory, a victory that does not require anyone's witnessing nor anyone's approval. A quiet victory, but one stronger and more enduring than anything else. As time passed, the calls from Margaret and Walter gradually became less frequent. I did not know whether they felt disappointed or had simply accepted the reality that we were no longer the children craving their approval like before. We had changed, grown in ways they could never have anticipated. On some weekend afternoons, as I sat by the window watching the sunlight stretch across the quiet garden, memories of the old days would surface. The pain that once felt so sharp was now just a faint scar. I no longer felt the need for revenge, nor the urge to prove anything to anyone. Through patience and self-respect, I had walked my own path. Thomas sometimes mentioned his parents, but there was no resentment in his voice. He would simply say, perhaps they too had their own limitations which they could not overcome. That one line, more than any justification, showed that true forgiveness had blossomed within him. Not the kind of forgiveness that forgets, but the kind that liberates oneself from the burden of the past. We did not completely sever ties with Margaret and Walter, but neither did we open our arms as they might have hoped. We remained firm to the principles we had set for ourselves, to offer help within our capacity, but never let guilt dictate our actions. A small gift during festivals, a phone call to check on their health during necessary times, that was enough. We gave kindness, but preserved our peace. Gradually, I realized a simple yet profound truth. The value of a person does not lie in how others treat them, but in how they treat themselves. The years Margaret and Walter failed to recognize our worth did not diminish us in any way. On the contrary, it compelled us to dig deeper, to mature, and to become the strongest versions of ourselves. Today, when I look back, I am grateful for everything that happened, the good as well as the painful. For without those lonely days, without being pushed to the sidelines, I would not have learned to stand firm on my own feet. Without the cold stares and harsh words, I would not have learned to love myself without needing validation from others. Perhaps Margaret and Walter never truly understood this. Perhaps, even till the end of their lives, they would believe that merely returning and expressing regret could mend what had been lost. But to me, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And love, once betrayed too many times, can never return to its original form. Thomas and I chose a different path, a path of growth, of self-respect, and of kindness with boundaries. We did not turn our backs on the past, but neither did we allow it to chain our future. In the end, we became the people we were proud of, not because someone else acknowledged us, but because we stayed true to our own values, despite everything. And that, to me, is the greatest victory. A silent victory, but far grander than any applause could ever be. Thank you for accompanying me till the end of this journey. If you have ever experienced the feeling of being taken for granted by your family or learned how to stand strong on your own feet, please share your story in the comment section. I would truly love to hear your experiences and perspectives. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out on more heartfelt stories. Because every lesson of growing up deserves to be heard and cherished.